There we go. Music not going down fast enough as I wanted it to. I am live. That is some excellent subscribing that we've been seeing from Dio, from Kaiser, from Kung Fu Fenders. All very appreciated. Kung Fu Fenders at level 2. Dio at tier 3, which is honestly kind of exciting and awesome to see all on its own. But any kind of support, whether you're just here or whether you tune into the VODs, all of it's there, all of it's great, all of it is fantastic and up our alley. So, hi, welcome. We're coming off of an excellent week of role-playing. I had a great time on Sunday with ExalTwitch Academy. I've also been really enjoying seeing what's happening on Disconcordia. So those are the two RPG projects that I'm involved in at the moment. Both of them doing quite well and quite interesting for themselves. And I'll urge anybody who hasn't yet had the opportunity to give Disconcordia a shot, if you're at all curious about playing Changeling in a casual setup where you can come in and play whenever you want, however often you want, whether that's, several times a day or whether that's once a week or once a month, you totally can. All of that is there and waiting for you. It is super cool to get a chance to finally play with a lot of you, something that we haven't been able to do before. And this is a way for us to give that a shot. So thanks so much for trying that out. The other thing that I'll point out is that for anybody who hasn't had the chance and who feels guilty about it, don't. This isn't about guilt. It is not something that people have to participate in order to be a part of the community. Absolutely not. It's not the kind of thing that if somebody can show up or not, that's fine too. I'll point out for some people who haven't been able to make it that two of our storytellers just haven't been able to participate as much as they'd like because they've run into some very busy times as well. So honestly, folks, there's no pressure, but you can join in if you like. To find your way onto the Disconcordia server, you kind of have to find your way onto our server, which means that I should have the bot active, which means I will be right back. I'll just knock everything over. All right. That's one half of my getting the bot live. The other half will come in a second when I can actually get around to turning that on once the computer is live. It is a green screen stream. It's actually behaving itself right now, which I'm pleased with. The green screen is actually just honestly just leaning against my bookshelf. No, it's not yet. It'll come up soon. But I have to, because the bot actually runs on the computer that runs our Sunday streams, and it's not typically on during the week. So I have to then go back and turn it on. And we got someone else logging in. Dio, that's fantastic to see. I'm glad that you're getting your washer. And now I'm going to go turn on the bot. There we go. And we'll just slide out of frame and then slide right back in. And then Low slides in. There you go. We're all kinds of sliding today. Well, as you might have guessed from the very beginning of this episode, and from what we can see right there up at the topic that we're going to be discussing, we're talking about RPG fatigue today, at least to start off, and we can branch off. Of course, if people have questions or if they have comments that they want to make on their own, that's absolutely what we're here for. We definitely want to hear them. But we kind of pick a topic to start off here on Clinic Hours just because sometimes we don't see everything that happens. Or we start things off just because sometimes it takes a while for people to filter in or they don't have questions themselves. But here we are. And there we go. Now I've got chat open. Now I can see everything. And now I have my setup. Great. I know that we've all been in a situation where we've been doing something something that we've enjoyed, and then either gradually or suddenly, it just doesn't bring as much joy as it once did. But what's changed? Not much. Maybe things are feeling a little bit regular. You know, there isn't as much challenge in the activity anymore. Maybe it's that it's become just way too much of a stressor in life. Maybe it's just because what you thought you were really into, you're just not that into anymore. Or maybe it's that what you were enjoying about it has stopped. Fatigue is a legitimate thing that happens to us in terms of a lot of our lives. Fatigue can happen in terms of relationships. It can happen in terms of work, in terms of hobbies. We just wear down after a while. And for some people, this is a temporary situation. They get tired of something, they wait, their batteries recharge, and then they're right back in it. And there are others for whom that's not an automatic process. They have to work at something to make it exciting and new and fresh again. And then there are times where they just can't recover. They get too tired of something and have to leave it behind. And we're going to discuss a whole bunch of these because that's what we're in for today. So the question that I'm going to throw out to chat right now, first and foremost, is have you experienced RPG fatigue before, and how long ago was it? What kind of prompted it, and how'd you deal with it, or did you deal with it? I experienced a bunch of different kinds of RPG fatigue over my career in playing and in running games. I started really kind of running games as a dedicated storyteller, where most of my gaming was me running games. About 21 years ago, I'd say. It was when that's where I transitioned to like storyteller for a lot of my gaming experience. And that was fine. I was going along with it without any issue, and yet this notion of fatigue kind of nagged at the back of my head. And for a long period of time, I would say, for maybe like 4 or 5 years in there, I did very little role playing at all. I just didn't. Now, some of that, I was still engaged in role playing adjacent activities. I was dealing with a web series that I was writing that involved role playing. But I wasn't actively playing. And at that time, I thought that it was because I didn't have players that I really was like excited to play with. But in reality, it was me. It was my fatigue that was preventing me from moving forward with games that I was interested in. It was my own reluctance to play. Because in all honesty, if you want to play in a role-playing game, you can. There are plenty of role-playing games out there that are online these days that are just searching for players, and you can hitch your wagon up to their convoy and go for it whenever you like. There's also a lot of, I would find, especially if you run games, you tend to not have difficulty finding people who want to play. As long as you're looking in the right locations. People are eager to find storytellers or even just gaming groups that exist that are willing to accept new people. But I didn't. I had stopped, and that was on me. And I think that it came down to a couple of different factors. The first is that I was associating role-playing with a group of friends who I had a falling out with. I kind of lost that entire group all at once. That's the sort of thing that happens when relationships go sour, romantic relationships and otherwise. And I found myself hanging out with different people and focusing on them as opposed to the group of friends who I would consider my gaming friends, my role-playing friends. And I think that in that instance, because I was, lingering with enough hurt and enough frustration coming and stemming from all of that I kind of started associating those negative feelings with gaming, and I put it aside. But that's only my major fatigue period. There were plenty of others where I just found myself struggling to maintain interest. So we're going to get into it. First, I want to actually have a look at some of what you've had to say. So Requiem has said, yes, I have just recently. Was in a massively multiplayer online role-playing game that I was enjoying for a long time. Then I got storyteller status thrust upon me that took up too much of my time, and I stopped enjoying the game. Yeah, a big shift in responsibility or schedule can definitely cause that kind of fatigue, especially the transition from one comfortable role where you're having a lot of fun to a role that you may not necessarily want or be suited for or have the time for, can really kind of wreck things. You see the sort of thing when it comes to businesses and promotions, that there are times where someone will get a promotion to management when they would probably be much happier just remaining in a creative role themselves. It actually happened to my father, of all things. My father was a producer for animation and really enjoyed kind of being that sort of helpful, creative, and guiding force for a film. And then at one point, he became the executive producer of the studio because the studio needed somebody in that position. And he expressed initial reluctance because it meant that he was dealing less with individual films and more with the big picture. And the big picture wasn't something that he was as interested in. Now, he adjusted, and he also, still found the time to be able to dip into individual projects and help out where he could. But that sort of promotional aspect can really weigh on somebody. And in role-playing, the most common aspect of this is when a player becomes a storyteller under duress. We need a storyteller. Our storyteller has quit or is otherwise unavailable or wants a break, so somebody else steps in, and then it's just such a different experience that they're no longer motivated to continue on with it. So it can be a rough transition for sure. Captain Silvertongue says, totes have. It's been a bit, probably over a year or so now. Usually it's when something gets stuck bad or I have a string of really bad player experiences or lack of room to create. Sometimes it's not that you're promoted. Sometimes it's just that the time that you're spending actually playing sort of sucks. Bad role-playing can definitely get you into that. And that was a large part of what I was dealing with as well. Towards the end of my role-playing career with this previous group of friends, I wasn't having as good a time. Part of that was because there were already sort of developing issues in that friend group when it came to interpersonal relationships, not even involving me, but involving each other, that were starting to express themselves in game, both as a meta part of the game and also as kind of a bleed aspect. Scheduling became harder, getting people to commit became harder, and then when we were playing, there were more instances where people were carrying in hurt feelings and having that reflect on their play, and that ended up being difficult to handle as well. And that was rough on me. I just wanted to have a good time, and I wanted to have a good time with my friends. And my friends were intent on not having a great time with each other. And the game got caught in the crossfire, and it started to weigh on me and cause stress. Kaiser Obnik says, I had a big case of GM fatigue a few years back. Then I realized I needed to lower my expectations. It's not solely the GM's job to entertain everyone, and it's not necessarily their fault if a session ends up being boring. This kind of ties into the mantra that I've been injecting into all of games that I'm associated with at this point. You actually have to swear an oath if you want to play on Disconcordia. And the oath is relatively simple, but it's there, and it's one that we do have to have everybody swear. And the oath is quite literally, I swear that I shall do my best to make this game fun for everyone, not just myself. And shifting the responsibility away from the storyteller being the sole person responsible for that to everyone at the table has been, I think, a helpful attitude shift for me, not even for my players. I still find that I'm putting a lot of effort into making sure that everyone's having fun. And I think the storyteller has that as a global goal, but I think that players definitely need to start kind of stepping up on that. And also, in the same place as Kaiser Omnic has said, it isn't necessarily the storyteller's fault if a session doesn't work out. It's everybody bears some responsibility for it. Now, clearly, you have a lousy storyteller, it's going to be a problem. You have a great storyteller, and you might have this problem less often, but you need the participation of the whole group to make something memorable. And this applies across all role-playing, whether you're doing a small-scale tabletop game, whether you're doing an online mass RPG like we're doing with Disconcordia, whether you're playing with hundreds and hundreds of players in a huge-scale LARP, it's the group that makes a big deal. Now, oftentimes if you're running a game, one of the skills that you need to exercise is curating a group. So, you do bear some responsibility there. But everybody needs to be aware of this, and everybody needs to be pushing forward for it as well. Avatar of Cain brings up, similarly to others, I had GMing fatigue for a year or so after a not bad but taxing year of running role-playing games 3 times a week. And one of the campaigns involved breaking down because my prep was more and more lacking in a game that was already very complicated and full of tweaks. Time apart has helped, but I've not done much DMing outside of one-shots, and I'm nervous to do a long-term game again. So that's approaching not just fatigue, but role-playing burnout. Burnout is a difficult kind of situation that we have to get into in some ways. The concept of burnout is overused, I find, at times. People will say, oh, I'm burned out. In much the same way that you'll also get people say, oh, I'm OCD, because they're fastidious or like things to be neat. Or saying, oh, I'm really insert other mental illness here. Burnout is rough because it's beyond just fatigue. Burnout is my internal batteries are completely drained, and it's hard to get them to charge again. Fatigue isn't necessarily a permanent condition. You can, once you experience fatigue, leave things behind and never come back to it. Maybe that's the best option for you. But burnout is just that the overwhelming pressure and stress of a situation. It can be, and stress can come from a bunch of different areas or locations. It can be boredom, can cause stress as well, that crushes you to the point where you actually can't get back to where you were before without help. Burnout's rough. And if you've experienced it, you know how different it is from simple fatigue. Burnout for role-playing games is also a real thing. And I don't know whether I experienced burnout or fatigue, because when I got back into running games, I came back with a vengeance, but also I came back being very, very picky about how I wanted to play games, and it's worked out marvelously for me. So as much as I'm like, when you've experienced burnout, I'm actually not necessarily certain, because I came back and I feel like I'm playing and having more fun than I have ever had. So perhaps I never experienced burnout in essence, because I didn't need so much help to get back into it as just being willing to advocate for myself. But burnout is a real thing. And if that's the sort of thing that you sort of feel like this is no longer fun for me now, and I don't believe it will be fun for me in the future, then you sort of have to make the choice whether you want to put in the effort to try to get back up on that horse or whether you shouldn't and leave it behind. I know that on a show ostensibly dealing about role-playing games, the last thing that I want to be able to tell somebody is maybe you shouldn't play. But in reality, that's a solution that I can suggest. Don't play. Just stop. You don't need to play role-playing games to live your life. You really don't. And I'd rather that people play if they enjoyed themselves than play because they feel they have to. Let's see. Angelwick says, as far as tabletop role-playing games, I've had the opposite. No opportunity to play for a long time. Now I'm happily alternating and playing and running with my current group. That's great. Good way to fight fatigue is to just not have the opportunity to engage and indulge. That helps. However, Angelwick goes on to say, my burnout comes with video games, particularly after a rather harsh conversation with my significant other at the time, who put down the hobby in such a way that I felt guilty for partaking. Even today, I start to feel anxious whenever I feel I want to play a video game. This is anxiety. I don't know if this comes from burnout, because the anxiety is coming from an external source as opposed from the source itself. I'm not a mental health professional, but it's still debilitating nonetheless. And I'm sorry that your significant other made you feel badly about stuff. I've been there. I've had people who are very close to me put down something that I'm interested in doing, and it can be a rough thing to come back from. When I was in the process of starting to write LARPs, when I finished drafts, when I finished the first draft, my partner refused to read it. I would ask for feedback, and I never got a single piece. But I didn't know at the time that my partner at the time was already planning on dumping me. So I think that stung a little less because it wasn't a significant other who I was, who I think the trust in that relationship had already kind of gone away to a certain degree, and I kind of dedicated myself to doing the opposite of what she was focusing on, and that worked out for me. But if you're feeling anxiety about something that you love because of somebody else kind of putting it down, I have also been there for other things, and it's not easy, but hopefully you'll be able to work through it. You may want to consider talking to something that brought you joy, and now worrying about bringing yourself joy is not a place that I would want to be in. Let's see. Requiem says, fatigue for me happens way more than a burnout. Fatigue often just needs a week or two off, sometimes a month, but it's more of a battery charge than anything. Yeah, burnout is a much different thing than fatigue. Fatigue is, I'm tired of this, or this no longer has the spark that I'm hoping for. Burnout is, I'm just completely done with what's happening. And it kind of extends to a lot of portions of life as opposed to just the one thing. You don't really just burn out in this, at least in this kind of nomenclature, right? Like, I'm not going to police your use of the term burnout, but the way that I'm describing it here, burnout isn't just, oh, I'm burned out on role-playing games, I don't want to play them anymore. It's I'm burned out on role-playing games, and like, it's affecting the rest of my life as well. Ellie Spot says, my experience, I had no freaking idea I was experiencing burnout until I was dragged to a doctor and lectured, saying, when you have experienced it sounds like bad advice. So yeah, I think I'm going to have to pull a retraction on that one. I think it's more like, if you've been diagnosed. Yeah, I am going to have to walk that one back. Especially because then I later on said that I wasn't even sure if I had experienced burnout. I know how difficult it is and how it can affect different people in different ways. So let's run a retraction on that. I'm definitely gonna throw that out there, that it's very, very possible that you may be experiencing burnout and just not recognizing it in your own self. That was irresponsible of me. I apologize. Yeah. But the idea also is that the idea of burnout as a mental health condition is different than, burnout can also mean, squealing your tires as you drag race. So we've got different situations there. Where a lot of people use the term burnout is, I think, what I'm trying to use fatigue for now. The idea that something that once brought you joy no longer does. So what are the causes that we can run into for that kind of thing? First and foremost, I find that I get fatigue when it comes to role-playing games when I have stress associated with it. So stress in this particular case comes from my own expectations or my players' expectations when it comes to playing. The thing is, I said it and then I realized, 10 minutes later that I'm like, I don't know whether I'm necessarily even agreeing with myself here. And then you putting that out there just kind of solidified it for me that no, I was talking out of my ass. So let's not. I am not an expert in a lot of things. And while I'm sitting here in front of the camera for this show, I am by no means trying to position that I am always correct and that there is no truth but my own. So if I'm getting a lot of pressure from myself to perform well, or if I'm getting a lot of pressure from my players to perform, that's one way. But I find that the stress can come from other areas as well. Scheduling stress, figuring out when can we play next, when would it be appropriate to play, where can we play, can everyone make it to the session, can I find a time for everyone to be around. That's a huge stressor, and it's also why I have essentially stated now that if I'm running a game, I will not do the scheduling. I will participate in the scheduling, but it will not be my responsibility to make sure that a game happens. And funnily enough, the games that I've been a part of on Sundays, the scheduling is easy. We stream on Sundays. We have a regular time for it. We've agreed to it, and that's that. That's when we stream. And that's worked out well for us. But funnily enough, other games that I have made it clear that I'm not going to do the scheduling kind of slips, and then other people don't pick it up, and I haven't stepped in. Now, whether that's my players just not being used to scheduling at that point, or whether it's because I'm deliberately letting the game fail, questions for another time. But I have refused to pick up those pieces at this point because of how stressed out I got in trying to chase after players. Because when I was chasing after players, I recognized that it also made me feel poorly. I felt like if I was trying to reach out to them and convincing them to get together to have a good time, that I kind of was begging my players to play. I was, and that I was trying to get them to do something that they didn't necessarily want to do. And that made me feel awful. So I stopped. I just didn't. I was not interested in taking care of that. So I stopped doing it, recognizing that it was a problem for me. Now, if, let's say, the other people in RPG Clinic came and sat down with me and we all decided that we couldn't do Sundays anymore, that we had to change the day, I would absolutely participate in that, right? Like it's just, I want it to be a group activity. I want it to not be my responsibility. So that's one of the ways that I started to avoid fatigue, was to remove a responsibility for myself that I did not want. At first I was trying to convince myself, like, I don't deserve to have this responsibility placed upon me. But I realized that for some people, scheduling is easy and fine. And it isn't accompanied with that kind of anxiety of like, oh, maybe my players don't actually want to spend time with me. In which case, Yahtzee, go for it. Go there. That's kind of one of the ways that we can go forward. Kaiser Omnic says, I've had social life fatigue, not just RPG fatigue, because of scheduling for sure. Yeah. It feels pretty awful sometimes to always be the person scheduling. And the problem is that there are people out there, and it's not that they don't want to spend time with you, it's that they don't schedule. It's just not in their nature. They don't want to tie themselves down, or they want to feel like they can do whatever they want at any given moment, or it just doesn't occur to them. And the problem is that for other people, they need to live their lives in a scheduled manner, either because that's their lifestyle. They must. For maybe you have a job for which your hours are counter to those of your friends, and so therefore you have to specifically plan when you have equal moments. Or maybe it's that schedules bring you comfort, that you like knowing that something is going to happen at this time and it will last for this long. And so when you get people who don't like scheduling, people who do like scheduling together, you can run into some issues. Because the other thing is, if you're always the one who's scheduling, it kind of makes it feel like you're the one who cares and the other people do not. And tragically, sometimes that's exactly the reason why. The other person doesn't schedule because they don't really want to, because they don't actually care about you. And they'll put up with you if you schedule something that they might like. One of the things that has been a source of frustration for me in my life is scheduling with somebody and then they cancel at the last minute, not because they have any great excuse, but because they've decided in that moment that they just didn't feel like doing what that was in that moment. When this happens, if it happens occasionally, that's fine. But when it starts happening more and more often, you kind of feel like you're on the hook with this person, that you're constantly chasing after them, and that they're not respecting your time. That they've just decided at one point, yeah, I know we agreed to do something, but I don't really feel like it today, so I'm going to say no. And if it happens often enough, then it sort of feels like this person's like, well, I might want to hang out with you if I have nothing better to do. And as soon as something better comes up, tough luck. This is why our games are scheduled on Sunday evenings. We just assume that Sunday evenings aren't available. People cannot schedule us in those times. I don't see my family at those times normally. I don't schedule time with other friends. I don't work on other projects on Sunday evenings because they are dedicated to the game, and the other players have it as well. Now, obviously, this isn't a hard set in stone rule. We have people who miss games occasionally, and we work it out, right? The only person who, if I miss a game, we're not going to play. If a player misses a game, if we can, we might run a session with only 2 people, but we also aren't above like occasionally giving ourselves breaks, but we're pretty good. In the course of a year, we don't miss more than like 3 or 4 sessions overall on average. That's a number that I'm pulling completely out of my head, by the way. I'm not certain that this is correct, but this is the way that we do it, and it relieves stress for me because I don't have to think about it anymore. So, social life fatigue sucks. And if you're the sort of person who constantly cancels on your friends because you're just looking for the best option, you're being kind of a dick. Cut it out. And if you are always the person scheduling with somebody else, don't assume that it's because they don't care. It could be that it just doesn't occur to them. And asking somebody, I want you to initiate hanging out with me, it doesn't always work like that. sometimes that is a legitimate reason to end a friendship or a relationship. But there are also times where it's just that person just doesn't operate that way. They don't think along those lines. So then you have to decide for yourself if it's a burden that you are willing to bear. For gaming, I no longer am. I'm no longer willing to be the scheduler to chase after everyone else. That's just not me. Looks like Captain Silvertongue agrees. Oh, that's a whole mood. I always felt terrible when I had to storytell, least in my eyes, badger someone to play. Like I was always the initiator. Yeah, I don't want to do that for role-playing anymore. So I don't. And I'm also selfish enough and arrogant enough, I guess you could say, that I don't feel like I have to, because I know that I can find players if you're not interested. So if you're not interested, I don't have to be interested in you. If I have to chase after you, then I don't want you. So yeah, it's just not something that I'm willing to put up with any longer. So it's not just that kind of stress that can lead to fatigue, though. I've experienced fatigue coming from boredom. Now, boredom is a different kind of stress, so they're not that far unrelated. But boredom isn't necessarily that anybody's doing anything wrong. It's that I am not experiencing the novelty that I want role-playing to have. Role-playing is a creative outlook. It's a creative activity, I should say. You are creating a story with the other people at the table and whatever random number generator you're using, or agent of chaos or fate or whatever. Most of the time this is referring to dice. That is creating a story that you're all participating in. That's a creative activity. And creativity is a funny thing. Creativity is not necessarily an infinite font that you can draw from at all times. And creativity does need to be refreshed. There have been times where I have been playing and realizing that I'm not having the same fun that I once had because I'm not as engaged as I once was. And that's a standard thing. That is going to happen. And sometimes it's my fault. I'm not pushing the game far along as I would like. And sometimes I could blame it on my players. They're caught doing the same thing over and over again. But in the end, I do have the agency to do something about it. And so do you. You have the agency, whether you're a player or a storyteller, to shake things up. Because the alternative to shaking things up is you being so bored with the game that either you play it on cruise control or you end up quitting anyway. Or you just sit there being miserable. None of which are great outcomes in that situation. If you're a player, if you find yourself constantly attacking problems in the same way, try something else. Be willing to fail. Which I think is one thing that players can start latching onto a bit more, is that oftentimes the drama, the story, the interesting bits on a story, it's when somebody isn't winning. It's when somebody is experiencing difficulty. Because overcoming that difficulty or succumbing to that difficulty is what makes for an engaging story. Learning about somebody who always wins all the time, no matter what, and without a challenge is not fun. And if you found that your characters are just going through those motions over and over again, it's basically reading the same book except with some names changed. Some people really enjoy reading the same book over and over again. I have definitely watched movies, played games, and read books that I've engaged with before and really enjoyed them. They can be comforting, or we can find new things that we didn't notice before. But it can also be frustrating and boredom-inducing, which is why sometimes when playing a video game, you might want to change the difficulty setting. Play with different party members than you had before. Try a different strategy. Give yourself a challenge. Same thing with playing games. your character is always ready to throw down and fight and wins most of the time when fighting, try using your words next time. Try to negotiate your way out. Even if your character's hopeless at negotiation, there can be all kinds of justifications for your character changing their modus operandi. And in a role-playing game, that might help you stave off that amount of fatigue. As a storyteller, find different ways to bring different aspects to your game. It doesn't have to be another dungeon crawl. It doesn't have to be another political intrigue. There are other ways that you can do this. It can be an introduction with new NPCs that'll really shake up the world. It can be a cataclysmic event. Something that I do urge people to think about is don't be afraid, if your game can support it, to make huge changes. An example that I can throw from video games is in Final Fantasy VI. Partway through the game, you lose a critical battle, essentially, and the entire world is destroyed. An apocalyptic event occurs, and then you are put into a world of ruin as opposed to the world that you were used to before. You have to regather your entire party because they've been separated and then move forward. And it is amazing because it shakes up your expectations about the game and gives people an eye on what could be possible if we're going forward now. What can an apocalyptic event looks like? If you're running a World of Darkness game, change something about the world that you never thought you would change. Maybe it was, maybe in Changeling, High King David dies. In Vampire, it could be that one of the clans leaves the Camarilla, or a clan that formerly was Sabbat decides to join the Camarilla and change their ways. In Werewolf, have the apocalypse happen. You know, just go for it. If the alternative is that the game is boring for you, find out where you have the license in your game to really shake things up, and then go for it. I'm not saying that all games can survive this. If you're playing with brand new players, bringing about the apocalypse may not necessarily be the thing that they're going to want to latch onto right at the start. They're not as aware of the game and the setting as they should be. But if you think that you can support it, take the leap. Take the leap. More often than not, if you've established that level of trust with your players, that even though this is going to change a lot, this can still be something that you can get excited about. You can stave that fatigue off. It happens. Let's see. Now that I've rambled. Requiem says, I know one quick way for me to get fatigued in RPGs is when I have to force the plot to happen for the players to do anything. Player motivation is a big deal, and player goals. And I have even recently, even live, experienced some struggles when I felt like players were content, or that players did not have specific goals that they were working towards that created dramatic tension. And that was my fault. I'm not blaming my players for it. But if players are not motivated to do something, if they are not unbalanced, then the drama cannot occur. There is no interesting drama with somebody who is perfectly content. It just isn't an interesting story. Perfectly content, there isn't anywhere to go. And in a role-playing game, you can find that. If you have a character who's like, well, I did my adventuring, I got all my gold, I'm going to retire, and I don't really care about going out and killing monsters anymore. But the whole game is about killing monsters. That character is no longer an integral part of the game. That character doesn't need to exist anymore. So if you have to force plot to happen, is that because your players have given up? They're becoming complacent? Is it because your players don't know what to do next because you're being too obscure about what's going on? There are questions Questions that need answering. At any rate, I just found out that Health Canada has authorized brand name changes for the vaccines. Interesting. So now I'm no longer a Pfizer fuckboy. Who would have thought? Now I'm a Comirnaty cohort, possibly. So Moderna is now known as Spikevax. No, this is the genuine Health Canada. I have a feeling like they're trying to rename these vaccines so that they no longer are referenced to the companies that have either developed or manufacture them. If I were to guess. I'm not entirely sure why these are happening, but if we give it a cool name, people, yeah, but Comirnaty is not a cool name. Spikevax seems like it would be kind of a scary name for some people. And the AstraZeneca vaccine is now known as Vaxzevria. Big shrug. Vaccines and names all along, just everyone use the company name instead. Yeah, similar to how people will refer to a virus as something even if it has an official designation elsewhere. And I'm glad that we're getting away from naming viruses after locations, because that does not help anyone. But I no longer have the cool vaccine, I guess, at this point, because I'm not spike-vaxxed. Oh well. Take your prescribed cathethin? What the fuck? Anyway. Sorry, that just, it popped up on my screen, and I saw that it had to do with vaccines, and I'm like, I should check, because I'm conditioned still these days that any kind of vaccine news comes out, I need to know about it in case I have to get another vaccine or I have to schedule an appointment. So, at any rate, aside from apocalyptic stuff that you can do for your game, another way that you can combat fatigue is to identify what it is that is causing you this stress and eliminating it. And I know that that sounds like obvious, but it isn't actually as obvious to me, at least, when I was dealing with various parts of fatigue as I would like. The scheduling aspect, for instance, that to me was me recognizing that this was a big stressor and for me to actually do something about it. It wasn't, oh, I don't like scheduling games, so I'm going to quit. It was, I don't like scheduling games, so other people now have to take on that burden as well. I don't want to be the be all and end all when it comes to scheduling for these games. The bot's down again? What? What's going on? One sec. Wake up. Why'd you go to sleep? Huh? Why you gotta be like that? Well, we'll see about that. I don't have any idea why that was happening, but whatever. Oh, I'm not... Oh, it's done. It's awake. I just don't know why it went back to sleep. Anyway. Crack. Still looking to see if you have your own fatigue RPG stories, which we'll throw up on here and talk about. One actual source of fatigue that I found that I also had to address and attack for was if I'm not if I feel like I'm not having fun. And not having fun seems like an odd thing to say about role-playing. It's one of the activities for which I devote the vast majority of my time. And it can be that I'm not having fun because of a system. It could be that I'm not having fun because I just don't like where the plot is going. And to escape fatigue in that circumstance, sometimes it involves ending a game and starting again. I am a long proponent of ending a game before the game stops being fun. End a game on a high note, end a game with people wanting more. And I have experienced resistance from this, from my players. And the funny thing about endings is that you often can't tell whether you did it right. Who knows if I was correct in insisting that ExalTwitch Nexus ended at 56 episodes. Who knows if I was correct when I started plotting the end of Changeling the Streaming. And who knows if I was correct when I asked my players after we had a particular session saying that felt like a good ending and maybe we should end it there. So it is a difficult situation sometimes to figure out when you should be ending a game. And you might get some resistance when you want to end a game because your players are having a good time. They don't want things to end like that. They don't want to stop a good thing. But fatigue sets in when you are playing longer than you should. At one point, I used to boast about how I had a Changeling campaign last for something like 13 years. And now I realize that that's a really dumb thing to boast about. Because if I am being absolutely honest, that campaign did not need to last that long. People were having fun, sure. There were years where it was more fun than others. Some may argue that it kind of kept that small little subset of our bigger, larger gaming group together longer, but it didn't need to last as long as it did. It overstayed its welcome. And when it ended not because we had a good ending, but because two of the players basically couldn't stand to be in the same room as each other. And that's an issue that I ran into where I was like, why stop? The game's going well, people are having fun, but maybe we could have had more fun and maybe we could have offset a lot of the fatigue that was setting in, not just for me, but also for the players, if we had decided to play a different game. Obviously, I can't go back in time and I can't fix that for myself, but it is something that I'm aware of, and it's part of the reason why we are now, when we're playing on our own channel here, we divide our game into seasons. Because that season is a gut check for us. Is this have we accomplished what we wanted to accomplish with this game? Do we want to continue playing, or are we tired of it? Or is there another game that's really exciting everybody and we'd rather play that instead? So these are things that we kind of look out for. And as Ellie says here, it does sound like you missed at least 7 years of playing another potentially great campaign, or possibly 2. Exactly. Running a 13-year campaign that was good is fine, but running 3 campaigns that are great is a better deal overall. And that campaign was great, but not for its entire 13 years. Fatigue sets in. Pugajutsu mentions, I think one of those times I hit that kind of fatigue was in a persistent world game, but that was because players could have more than one character there, so it became a roguelike of introduction scenes. So that's overstimulation, and that's another thing that you can run into with fatigue. One of the issues of mass games you'll find, and that we will have to control for, is that in a mass game, it is tempting to lock in and just play and play and play and play. And you are so oversaturated with the game that it stops being something novel and exciting, and it becomes routine, or it becomes a chore. We've already tried to put in design aspects into this game to avoid that circumstance, such as you can only have one character, and you get no bonuses for making a new character unless the retiring of the previous character added to the story of the game itself. So we're discouraging people from the idea of, I feel like playing an X today, even though one would think that that's novel and therefore the player could have different experiences. Why are we doing this? Shouldn't that alleviate fatigue? Well, it actually prevents the oversaturation. It prevents the fatigue that comes from no continuity in a role-playing game. And you lose continuity if all that happens all the time is you're meeting new people constantly, and you never get to hang out with the people who you know because they're always leaving. I'm not saying this in order to discourage people from joining. We love new people, and obviously the server is just kind of getting started. It's just sort of kicking in. So new players, right now, every new player is a great percentage value add to the game. But it would get really frustrating if you were like, well, I want to talk to this character, and now I can't because that character is gone. But every time I'm playing, I have to hear about, 5 new backstories because there's 5 new characters coming in every day. But I can't bother getting invested in these characters because I know that they'll disappear in a month, because then there'll be a new cycle of characters coming in. So don't get involved in any PC because you know that they will not last is fatiguing. So that is one element of our design that we've got in to make sure that, or to at least attempt to alleviate that kind of pressure. Kung Fu Fenrir said, I ended a Game of Thrones game before the Blackfire rebellions went nuts because PCs had died, but the house was on a high note. Players resisted a lot, but I kept to my guns. Yeah, players will resist. They do. It is, it's something that you just kind of have to put up with. No, you should listen to their concerns. I probably would have ended Changeling the streaming earlier if my players hadn't convinced me that they were still engaged and had a lot left that they were wanting to play for, and the game picked back up. I was starting to worry that it was waning, but it didn't, and I felt like we managed to do some awesome things after the fact. I was looking to end it around session 70, so a little over halfway. I was like, I don't know, maybe this is kind of done, and then we ended up going until 136. So that ended up working out for us, but that was due to players kind of making sure to convince me otherwise. But at the same time, I did insist on ending it when I wanted to. When it came the second time around, I was like, I think we're done. And my players were in a better position to agree to that. It is sometimes a tough decision to make, so you got to just make it and hope that it'll work. It's just a cacophony of greetings. Yeah. I've really enjoyed getting to know all the players and all the characters in Disconcordia. But I'm the one who sanctions characters. I sanction the vast majority of them. And I will also admit that I don't want to sanction somebody 8 times because they just want to try stuff that's new. You can't join Disconcordia and expect to play right away. You have to create a character using the rules of Changeling the Dreaming 20th Anniversary Edition and our player's guide. It's not an onerous process, as I think anybody who's been through the sanctioning process can tell you. We're checking to make sure that your math is right, to make sure that you're compatible with the game, and to make sure that your backstory and the like aren't completely off the rails. But it would suck if I had to do that 10 times a day, because then I would never get a chance to play, and I'd also sort of wonder why I was bothering to put the effort in. Kung Fu Fenrir says, I actually think it's easier to just stop a game instead of finding an ending, but an actual ending is a lot more satisfying. It actually fuels me to find something new. Yeah, if you go for a good ending, if you find a good ending, then it's really satisfying, and it can really, really help. You can't always, but if you can, magnificent. It's so much more fun when you can get an ending that people can really sort of butt into. If you can get an epilogue that people are, feeling a bit emotional about as they go through the rest of the game, that can be a lot of fun. That can be a lot of fun. So, thank God I didn't so many great storylines past that point for Changeling. Well, I hope so. Once again, you'll never necessarily know, because maybe if I'd stopped that game earlier, we would have had an even better game afterwards. But can't say for sure. Cannot say for sure. I'm just very pleased with what happened and how it happened, and that's kind of what you have to go for. But you also can't beat yourself up. As long as you don't catastrophically fail to stick the landing of a game, even if the ending isn't fantastic, it doesn't wreck the whole game. I still have fond memories of that Changeling campaign that I ran for 13 years. There are elements of it that I thought were a lot of fun, and moments that I still remember and hold as awesome times. But I mean, it did not end well. By definition, it ended just about as poorly as you could have hoped, without it being an active disaster, just because the game ended abruptly with no warning, or at least no warning that I was aware of. So I am still happy that I played that game. So also don't fret too much about endings. Definitely pay attention to them. Definitely end games when they should end. Definitely take to heart the idea of leave them wanting more. But leave them wanting more also isn't necessarily, okay, so the final battle is just about to occur, and that's the game, and we're not going to play the final battle. This can be a really interesting way to end a game if that final battle isn't something that anyone's all that excited about doing, but the idea of the final battle is more interesting. That can work. But you don't want to do that and be like, well, leave them wanting more, because now you're just basically teasing them and then yanking their toy away, which is no good either. So it's got to be a little bit careful about ending too early. But there are ways to give people what they want. Requiem says, had a literal Rocks Falls ending to a game once. Was a D&D 3.5 game. Let's just say there was a poorly placed fireball in an unstable cave that I warned the players about multiple times. Good times. It kind of depends on the kind of game you're running. If I did that in Changeling or in one of the ExalTwitch games, it would be a very cruel thing for me to do. And even if I said, well, look, everything that you are doing right now is going to cause a complete party wipe and the game will end, and the players went ahead and did it, that to me would be a disaster. But a game where you're just like, yep, we all kind of ran around, we played a couple of sessions, we're mostly just sort of goofing off, rolling dice, and then everybody dies that way, sometimes that'll just get a great laugh at the table, and that's all you need. And that's all you could have hoped for. And that's the game that you get. And that can be a lot of fun. Osa brings up the Angel TV series ending. So at the risk of spoiling, I'm not going to spoil everything, but at the risk of spoiling a series that is very old at this point. The last episode of Angel has characters going out to fight a battle that they most likely have no chance of winning, and we don't find out what happens. It just stops. It ends right there. Now, you could argue that it continued on in comic book form and all of that, but they just went ahead and did it, and that was an ending. The Sopranos ending, same sort of thing. Tension is being built up. Is this going to be a big deal, or is this just a normal day? Somebody looks up, the screen cuts to black. That's the end of the series. I thought that was a brilliant ending, but not all endings can work this way. So that's a question to go forward on that too. Kung Fu Fender says, okay, a bit off topic, but I had an interesting thing tonight in my Legend of the Five Rings game as a player. The GM is kind of new. During a solo investigation process, I kept on pursuing leads that ended up taking up 20-ish minutes of game time, which in retrospective was a bad move on my part. Bit of spotlight hogging. Problem was the GM was a bit resentful at me for doing this instead of being more aware of just cut the investigation scene and share the spotlight again. Yeah, so in this particular situation, not being there and not having the details and not being aware of your table dynamics, I can only go by what you've said. I'd say that you both share some blame for that. It's so, and which you acknowledge, you've said it right away. You knew that you were taking up a lot of time that wasn't necessarily interesting for everybody else. The storyteller knew that you were taking up a lot of time that wasn't necessarily interesting for anybody else, but neither of you did anything about it. The thing is, if you've got a good game, you want to watch other people's scenes. You want to see what kind of comes up for them as well. So it's less of an imposition. That's kind of what we have going on our Sundays, that oftentimes we'll have a player who has a scene where they are spotlit and it's only them. My players really like to split up. They really like to split up, and I'm actually totally fine with that because they're still interested in each other's stories at that point. And that works. But if it's not working, you might want to consider as a player to sort of be like, I've been monopolizing a lot of the table's time right now, and maybe I shouldn't. And the storyteller should also recognize that. And finally, also, players can step in as well. If you were using our play, pause, stop cards, I would not necessarily feel badly if a player threw up a pause card and said, hey, it's been 20 minutes on something that honestly, like, I have to admit, I'm getting bored. That would be an appropriate use of the card. Now, it wouldn't be appropriate if somebody was like, hey, nobody's paid attention to me in the past 180 seconds and I'm annoyed at that. Like, obviously that's not something that works, but you can advocate either in the moment or after the session. It is totally appropriate to say, hey, just so that you know, during that investigation scene, I wasn't participating, I wasn't doing anything, and it wasn't interesting enough to hold my attention. That's a fair criticism to make. I would not like it if I was running a scene with, say, Elizabeth, and Scott and Kate were checked out of it, and I just kept going because I was like, well, Elizabeth's doing something in the game and rolling the dice and engaging with the mechanics, and we're waiting for her to look at the rules and all of that without actually engaging the other players. That would suck. That'd be wrong. If I'm running a scene that everybody is kind of like on the edge of their seats waiting to find out what happens next, it's okay. You don't necessarily have to cut from that point. Do I know if there's an easier way to approach it instead of telling them to learn how to direct scenes? I wouldn't say learn to direct scenes. I would give them permission to direct scenes. And I know that's it's a psychological technique, but telling somebody you need to learn to switch back and forth between the players at the table so that everybody kind of stays engaged, that's one thing. But another way that you can put it is, hey, so, while I'm doing this, I don't mind being interrupted if you want to go to another player to like keep things moving for everybody else. In one way, you're telling the storyteller what to do. In the other way, you're giving the storyteller permission and also at the same time reminding them that they have that option. The idea of a storyteller who is not being directive means that it's a skill that they need to develop. If you split the party, that is an important thing to deal with. In much the same way that in a television show with an ensemble cast, you don't want to spend a whole lot of time on the A plot and then have the B plot show up only for 2 minutes at the beginning and 2 minutes at the end if you're supposed to engage the audience and all the characters equally. There will be times where an episode will feature some characters more than others. Absolutely. There might even be special episodes which focus specifically on one or two characters, and that's it. But if the point of the show is an ensemble, you can't ignore the ensemble. And in much the same way, storytellers can't do that for their games. So, Requiem points out, as I grab some water, the way you do it is awesome, if I may say. If Kate, for example, needs to double check a rule or check her dice, you just jump to someone else while she does what she needs to do. I try to do that. And unfortunately, or in my case, fortunately, I should say, this takes some training for everyone. It's not just the storyteller who has to be aware of this. You will find that players don't always like having the focus taken away from them while they're figuring something out. Some are relieved. It means that there's no longer the stress of them figuring something out because everyone's waiting for them. But in some cases, it's the opposite. It's they sort of feel like if you're cutting away from them, then that's kind of a critique of their behavior, saying like, well, you're not fast enough, so we're taking away from you, we're going to somebody else. That can suck. So you got to be a little careful about that. It is, but my players are used to it by now. But I also make sure to, go back and check in, and never to make a player feel like, oh, these things that you wanted to do, you can't because I had to skip your turn because you were taking too long to figure out what you were doing. I have seen that happen in games. I have absolutely kind of seen games occur where this is a rule, and I've even used this rule before. I've even at one point gleefully used this rule where I was like, okay, figure out what you're gonna do. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, you didn't think of it. You didn't think of it fast enough. So too bad. Also, thank you for the follow. Was that last Socratic? Yes. Thank you for the follow. That rule is very useful if everyone is a veteran and they know what they're doing, and the reason why you're instituting that rule is because people's attentions are wandering, or because they're suffering from paralysis and they need an urge to go forward. But it can also just be a dick move, especially if somebody isn't entirely familiar with the game and isn't familiar with what's on their sheet, or oftentimes people have paralysis in this way because you haven't been giving them enough context for what's happening in the game. They're waiting and trying to figure out what their options are because they don't have a mental picture of what's going on in game, and you haven't given it to them. So I don't like doing that rule anymore, and instead I kind of swap over to somebody else. The most penalty that I might give somebody is I might say, we're going to sacrifice your place in the initiative order, but you'll get a chance to act this round. But we're going to have other people act first. I don't do this often. I will do it if I know that, for instance, the player's action isn't going to have a fundamental change on what's going to happen to everybody else. For instance, if Scott was hesitating and not knowing what to do, but I knew that the person that Scott wanted to attack had already attacked that round, so wasn't likely to attack again, and somebody else attacking wasn't necessarily going to interfere what he was going to do with, then I might be like, look, we'll just get to you later. But I wouldn't necessarily want to do it if the person's like, well, if I don't attack first, then that means that the big bad has another chance to let off their doomsday ray. Then it's really, really harsh. And you punish a player for feeling like they haven't mastered the system if you just skip their turn. Now, if a player is just not paying attention and not putting in the effort, you can do this, but then I'd argue that you have a bigger problem at your table. You have a player who's not paying attention, who isn't engaged, who is slipping engagement. Now, some people, this is how they play. This is how they're going to react, especially if you're playing with somebody who is neuroatypical. They may have difficulty holding on to their attention to one thing for too long or whatever, but you can still set expectations for the game itself. And also players who know that they may have difficulty, maintaining their attention can warn the storyteller in advance and work out a system to resolve this. One of which might be, hey, so when it's your turn, I'm going to give you a limited amount of time, so you better be ready. So it's not... Oh, and I see that we've got people in chat bringing it up. So it is not... it is not something that I can say, like, somebody being distracted, there's a lot of reasons why someone can be distracted. Punishing them for their distraction isn't as useful as working with them on the distraction. Kung Fu Fenris with the dots. Kaiser Omnic says, I don't know how some GMs handle 6+ players. D&D is really bad at keeping people's focus during combat. Combat is not very dynamic. Yes. But that's because the options that you have in combat are limited because it's more gamified. In D&D, the math is done for you, right? It's... Okay, I don't want to put it this way because it sounds like I'm demeaning it. I'm not. But try to bear with me here. D&D's combat is like having a bike with training wheels on it. The training wheels are there to make sure that things don't tip over. You have a reasonable expectation of how something is going to go based on who is in your party, what are their levels, what challenge level of encounter have you built, etc., etc. The math is done. And because the math is done, there's less room for maneuvering or less room for spontaneous play. And so therefore, the play that you are dealing with by yourself is the strategy that you have for your character to do what they want. And the main thing that you're paying attention to is who's targeting who when, and whether there's something that your character has to be aware of. Like if your character is a healer, oh, somebody has lost hit points, I have to pay attention to that. Games like storyteller system games like World of Darkness, because the combat takes place more in theater of the mind, it's more dynamic, and therefore it's a lot harder to balance, and it's not nearly as easy to come up with scenarios without being able to think quickly on your feet, without having that improv style as a storyteller. But it means that everyone sort of has a better idea of what's going on because things can shift and change, and your character doesn't necessarily have to engage in combat in order to be effective. In D&D, everybody is effective at combat. Every single character class is designed around combat and their abilities for combat. And that's fine. That's totally fine for that game. There's nothing wrong with that. Lots of people, myself included, love playing games that just are like, yep, we're going to pick up some dice, we're going to chuck them, we're going to kill some shit. That's totally okay. No problems there. But in the World of Darkness, you can play a character who can't participate in combat. Or you can create a character who is amazing at combat from character creation. So in a way, it is something to think about. Exalted, the concept of Exalted, part of it is everybody is encouraged, strongly encouraged, to at least be good at one kind of combat, because combat is most likely going to happen, and it's nice to have something to do. But you don't have to focus on it if you don't need to. In Changeling, you could have no combat dots and still have an effective game, and even still participate in combat. You're just going to participate in different ways. So you get into that sort of dynamism, which D&D doesn't allow. Your character has a specified role in combat that they play, and that's the way it is. So it's not to say that you can't have changes or unexpected things happen or more interactivity in your D&D games, but the system by its default is not designed for that. You're bringing that in extra on your own, and that's okay, but it's tough. I refuse to play D&D with a group higher than 5 at this point. I don't. I did it once. I hated it, and I don't do it anymore. Then I broke my own rule, and it wasn't D&D. It was a different system. Had 6 players. Found out that that's not the kind of game I want to run. I like running story-heavy games. I like running conversation games. I like having people try to figure things out. I like people having combat where combat is intense and personal. And in a 6-player game, it's not. It's a game of Overwatch. And Overwatch can be really fascinating and fun to play for if that's what you're into, but it's not what I'm into. So I just don't. Let's go back in here. Kung Fu Fenrir is saying, I just realized what the hell happened with that scene. My brain went into hyper-focus mode and did not break immersion. Usually I'm good at keeping myself medicated enough to avoid that. Yep. Hyper-focus happens. That's why I'm not saying you fucked up. You're a terrible player. I'm saying it happens to the best of us. Look, there are games that I run online and I leave them and I'm like, holy shit, that was a terrible session and it's all my fault. And sometimes I'll have my players and the audience come to me afterwards and be like, that was so much fun. I was great. Like, heavy talking games for me, which are quite introspective and personal, I'm always worried the audience is going to be annoyed, and then they often aren't. But there are also times where I've run a game and I've been like, wow, that sucked, and nobody argues with me. And that doesn't mean I'm a bad storyteller. It just means that, some days you have it and some days you don't. Requiem says, I think it depends on the group. Some people can keep interest in combat really well. Yeah, it absolutely is true, but the issue is, what are you there for? What are you looking to do? Because if you're 6+ people playing in a role-playing game, at that point you're not really doing as much role-playing as you are playing in a video game with other people, and the focus becomes more and more on when's it going to be my turn next. And for some people that's fine. Some people that's going to be exactly what they want to get out of a game. And that's totally fine. I am not saying that these are bad ways to play. I'm saying that for me, it's death. I really like the roster system I've seen used. You have your initiative, but any person on a team can use each slot. Yep. I'm liking that initiative system more and more. The reason why I like it is because it also gives me the sort of idea in my head that the point is it's my team's turn to act, and therefore it encourages a team aspect. It means that players can discuss amongst themselves who should take this moment and what would they do with it, as opposed to, it's my turn, I've been focusing on myself and I know what I want to do. Making it a roster system means now the team has to figure out what to do, and the team can figure out whose character it is, while still not taking away the individuality of each player, right? You might say, okay, well, it's Scott's turn, but that doesn't also mean that you have to tell Scott what to do with his turn. And here we have Nomenclature saying, I find more and more games are being designed with off-time or downtime in mind, like Eclipse Phase, which is one of my favorite systems for balancing combat and non-combat by blurring the line between the two. We are just getting better at game design as a whole. that is something that we are doing just in terms of artistic endeavor. One of the ways to look at it is look how much movies and television and books and music have changed over the years. Books and music have been around for millennia. Television, century. Movies, over a century. And then we also have to look at newer media like video games or role-playing games, which haven't been around as long. 50 years, when you look at it, it's like, wow, 50 years, that's so much time. Like, I can't believe it. But think about how different television was in the 70s compared to how television is today. Think about how different television was when it first started to how it is today. Role-playing games have a long way to go. And we're only improving. We're only getting better. Look at video games. Look at the difference between video games that you have a long time ago versus video games now. And the thing that you also have to remember is that we are self-purging. It's kind of like if you ever have somebody say, man, music in the 60s was so much better than it is today. And they start rattling off all kinds of songs that came out in the 60s. Maybe they're talking about songs in the 80s or the 90s or the aughts or the 10s. And the reality is that there was a shit ton of music that was really bad too. We're remembering the hits. We're remembering the things that came out that were amazing. If you look at the Nintendo Entertainment System, you can look at the game Super Mario Bros. 3 and you might be like, that game is a classic. You can play that game and still have tons of fun with it today. It holds up. And it's true. That game does hold up today. It is fun to play. But there were hundreds of games released for the Nintendo Entertainment System. And yet, when you ask people to like remember the top games from that era, they only come up with maybe 100 titles. And if you ask people of those games which are regularly consumed today, that number falls to a very low number. And role-playing games, you can say, you know, like, look, I've had fantastic time playing role-playing games. Like, there are people out there who are like, I played Dungeons & Dragons when it first came out in that red box, and I loved it. Why would I need 5th edition? 5th edition is a better design. But it doesn't mean that your game that you enjoyed way back when was bad. And it doesn't mean that it necessarily would have been better with a new edition. But I will tell you that games are more likely to be more fun and to be better using a better designed game than before. And remember that better design also takes into account other aspects that we might not necessarily be thinking of right away, such as, for instance, the concept of, cultural appropriation in role-playing games, or the idea that every role-playing book released in the 70s basically only used the male pronoun for everything, and people didn't realize that this might be alienating to some. I still remember in my copy of Advanced D&D 2nd, is it there? Yeah, hold on, I'm going to get it. All right, so this, E.T. was not on the NES. E.T. was for the Atari, or at least the infamous one that everyone's talking about. So this is the first gaming book that I ever owned myself, and I read the hell out of it, and I will show you that it is badly beat up because I dropped it in the bath more than once because I just couldn't put this thing down. I still remember the smell of this book and of its binding. Yeah, we're just going to have to leave the bot for now. I don't know why that computers are going around. But I still remember right at the beginning, if I say here on page 8 of D&D's 2nd edition, the male pronoun, it says a note about pronouns. The male pronoun he, him, his is used exclusively throughout the 2nd edition of the AD&D game rules. We hope this won't be construed by anyone to be an attempt to exclude females from the game or imply their exclusion. Centuries of use have neutered the male pronoun. In written material, it is clear, concise, and familiar. Nothing else is. So even back when this game was released, they kind of realized, hey, we don't necessarily want to avoid having females, as it were, not enjoy our game. And yet they were still just willing to say, yeah, but we're going to use he, him because that's what we're comfortable with. And that's what the world is comfortable with, right? So as we improve in design, we realize that that's fucking bullshit. And we also recognize that stuff like that is enough to make somebody decide that a game isn't for them. There are legions of men out there who wish that they could find a partner who would roleplay with them, not realizing, of course, that the games that were out there at the time did nothing to try and pull them in. Nothing to try to pull women into the game, or girls, or NBs, or anyone who wasn't basically a straight male. So the idea if okay, I just have to bring this up. If no girls play, why should we mention girls in this world we're describing? I mean, you mention girls because they're prizes to be won, or they are femme fatales, or where else are we going to show our wicked fantasy art of a woman wearing a chainmail bikini lounging on a polar bear? Or if you could get into the game, it was only as the soft cleric, right? Yeah. It is absolutely a thing. And a nomenclature says, Snipe and Whip had a whole bit about this from the Dragon magazine, bitching about the same thing. It's almost like they has been a word for centuries. Yep. Look, I totally understand that they can be confusing for people because it's used as a plural pronoun. I don't feel like it's actually that hard to make the swap. I don't know how language is going to evolve in this particular way, but I know that it will. Language has always evolved, and it will continue to evolve from here on out. But, just even that amount of design, but also design like making sure that players have agency in their games, making sure that games don't have odd, esoteric rules that don't actually improve anything. This book alone is full of these things. There are, if I go into the back, like let's look at Appendix 8, which is compiled character generation tables, and seeing that we have to have like charts for every individual stat. And then we can go on to the idea of thieving skill base scores, which are set in a percentage. Or how about thieving skill dexterity adjustments so that your dexterity has differences for pickpockets, open locks, find, remove traps, move silently, hide in shadows. Or thieving skill armor adjustments, and not realizing that we can simplify this without needing to have charts upon charts upon charts, without sacrificing the fun. That simulation and simplicity are often at odds with each other, and the trick is to find the right balance. There's a lot of things that we have figured out, but the idea is that we have learned, and we have so much more to learn. We're not at the apex of game design. We're really not. And that's not to say that older games can't be brought out and enjoyed. That's absolutely true as well. But we are getting better, and we are learning. Hell, the concept of safety tools in RPGs is less than 10 years old in terms of even moderate acceptance by the community as a whole, right? It just wasn't a thing. And it's starting to get to be a thing. And now we've realized that we need more than one safety system because not all safety systems work for all tables. It's just a matter of design and us figuring our way out of that. Anyway, so I've gone off way on tangents here. Captain Silvertongue says, I was playing 3.5 D&D and I wanted to dual class as a gnome between Bard, and dread and was told no because the character descriptions of what those would be in the book were opposite. See, like, I would also say, if you're going to tell a player no, you should have a reason why. It's not you should tell a player yes only if you have a reason why. Is the game going to be fundamentally worse for someone at the table if you allow this player to make this choice? And if the answer is no, bear in mind, of course, that includes you as the storyteller, then why not? If it's going to be like, this is going to be a rules nightmare headache and I don't want to deal with it, that's fine. That's a legitimate reason to say no. But if it's, but it's sort of strange and different, maybe that's not enough. Maybe that's not enough. Pramster pulling at the Pendragon 6th edition. I actually am really curious to see what Wizards of the Coast is going to do with 6th. 5th edition was designed to sort of be a long-running thing, but they haven't gone this long without releasing a new edition in some time, and I imagine that 6th edition is on the way. And I'm curious to see what they're going to do with it, especially because they're trying to fix D&D now with Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. But I think that the way that they're going to do it is they're going to move to a subscription model, and that they're going to have they're going to really focus on making sure that online tools are robust. They're basically going to take this game into the digital age, and I'm not certain that that's what I want, but I think that there are uses for it. But I think that's what 6th edition is going to focus on, is making it easier to run games online. Let's see. Anna Nomenclature says, it's especially funny to me because since I was a child, it's especially funny to me because since I was a child, I've been face blind and had an awful memory. So often people would bring people up and I would have no idea who they were. So I just use they to avoid messing up. Yeah. They is a perfectly fine word. It's also grammatically correct. It is in English. So people who say that it's not are fooling themselves. I understand the frustration and the struggle, but I think that we can be a little accommodating here. I also understand the frustration and the struggle with people for whom this is just like a brand new concept, but we can move forward. We can figure it out. I also can understand and at times sympathize with people who struggle with pronouns that end up being too confusing. But that's another question. I think that it is appropriate to be called what you want to be called. I do think that there can be situations where it gets difficult for clarity's sake, and they is not one of those situations. So, I have met somebody who insisted that no pronouns be used at all for them, which didn't make sense because they used I, which is a pronoun, but said just always use my name because I identify with no pronouns. And I'm like, well, now you're just making language extremely complicated, and I'm not sure for what benefit. That was difficult to deal with. But anyway, we're all trying to find ourselves. I can't be too hard on somebody who's trying to find themselves. I need to try and see about getting my group off D&D. Okay, so I do think that D&D is a good game. I know that it's not my favorite game, but it's a game that I will gladly play. I think that it's a good game. I don't know if I want to run it that much. And if I'm being honest, I wouldn't jump at the chance to join a D&D game. I will play it. Kind of depends on who's playing it with me. It's not my favorite, but if you want to try to get a group off D&D, you got to figure out what their emotional kicks are and appeal to them. So find out their player types. Go back to the classics if you want to go with the laws designations of butt kicker, tactician, power gamer, specialist, method, storyteller, casual. Yeah, you could go back to that and see what you can find there. and find out what it is that drives them in games. And then find a game that you can say, this is a game that will let you do this. Perhaps even better than D&D will. The thing that got me was I liked story and I liked character. And when I found systems that were more focused on story and character than straight up combat, I left D&D and I barely looked back. So, but you also kind of have to say, hey folks, let's give this a try. And it might mean that you have to be the storyteller. But it is, I think, worth it at times to be like, there are other things that we can try, but you also have to give them reasons to accept your new thing. You can't just say, I want to do this, so let's do it. In a lot of ways, you also have to position it as, this is why you would like this as well. Yeah, Luke, the idea that, see, I am not trans, so I would not make those sorts of jokes. The reality is that I think that it's important to respect somebody's personal identity, boundaries, and wishes. I also think that people need to make an effort to understand that we have a society. I don't want to say we live in a society because that's a meme in and of itself, and that everybody makes some moves to try to make society work. I don't think you should do that at the expense of your identity. I do think that you have to evaluate whether a choice that you're making is necessary and also worth the difficulty that society is going to place upon you. For instance, actually claiming that you have no pronouns just makes it very difficult to refer to you as anything other than your name, which makes language incredibly awkward and it hampers communication. Is having no pronouns something that's very important to you, or is having no pronouns something that you have chosen because it makes you unique, and because you want to feel unique, you therefore are okay with inconveniencing people? The first, I will be happy to accommodate you. The second, less so. So that's the trick. And it's very difficult to discuss this kind of thing because I don't want to piss anyone off. And I also don't want to appear like an old fuddy-duddy. But I also know that given the opportunity, I will lean very heavily towards you tell me what you want and I'll go with it. As opposed to I'm going to go with what I want because it makes me more comfortable. It's just also the idea that if we react with outrage, then society will in fact not change, it will calcify. But the vast majority of people I know who use alternative pronouns do not become outraged at somebody making a mistake. They don't. It's not worth it. I have friends who have alternate pronouns or have changed pronouns who mistake themselves and they move on. And it isn't even necessarily a matter of like forgiveness. It's just a matter of like, oh, okay, moving on, right? Like we just move on as long as the effort is made. But that's the question. And what it comes down to, of course, as Luke says, is it has to be a balance, and we have to understand that we can't expect people to understand overnight. But at the same time, also, we can expect people to just show some basic fucking decency. So let's show some basic fucking decency to people. I don't think that's hard. I think we can get behind that. I can. Murder hobos enjoy that red rum. Murder hobos aren't part of Robin D. Law's character types. Butt kicker is the one that falls most closely to that. Butt kickers are the types of players who enjoy making a very basic character who can very simply knock something down, take its treasure, and move on. It's somebody who just wants the feeling of winning the glory of combat without needing to think too much to do it, versus a power gamer who is interested in manipulating systems to maximize their victory, versus a tactician who wants to outwit the GM however they can in order to win, expending the least number of resources possible, to have the most dominating victory possible. Basic fucking decency, Lo. If there's one thing I know about you, it's that that's something that you strive to show each and every day. The role-playing space has a ton of trans people in it. I don't want to say, like, I can't tell you what the proportion is, but if we go by like basic population rules, the number of people who are trans or fall anywhere on the LGBTQIA2 plus spectrum is very high. So, you know, it's just something we gotta learn to fucking deal with, yo. Role-playing is often the place where we discover about ourselves because we're given the license to try, to push, to learn. I had a friend once who actually made role-playing, wrote a whole anthropological paper on how role-playing was a way for somebody to explore their sexuality, not just in terms of their gender preference or gender identity, or but also kink and fetish, all through role playing. And it was I really wish that I had access to the paper, because I would have loved to like see how things had changed in the past 15 years along those lines as well. But it is a place to do that. So obviously, also if you're in the role playing space, showing some basic fucking decency is kind of even more important, because goddamn, you can't get away with it. You can't. You just got to. On Disconcordia, one of the questions that we ask during sanctioning is if the player has pronouns that they want to declare. And if they do, we put those pronouns as a role on the Discord server. So if I click my name on the Discord server, I have two roles. I have storyteller, because I am the storyteller. But I also have a role that's player, he, him, because those are my pronouns. And it's just honestly really kind of cool that I can click on somebody and I can see what their pronouns are. I can see what their character's pronouns are. And I can see the various other bits of information that we slip in there as roles. The roles don't give you any special privileges. They're just there so that I can see them. But we have a lot of people who are not using standard pronouns on Disconcordia, and honestly, I couldn't be happier that we have that system in place, because I really like to know how people like to be called and referred to. So it helps. It also helps because we sometimes it's difficult for people to figure out what a character's gender is right off the bat, because you can play a gender that's not your own. So yep, Ellie makes a very good point. It's neat for everyone, because even if you are cis, internet nicks are not terribly good at revealing pronouns. Absolutely. I'm a little different in that I use my name, but yeah, and I really love it, because I also don't want to default, right? I don't want to default to, he's doing something if I have no idea, because I still catch myself doing that sometimes. I try to use they if I don't know what the person's pronouns are, but also if you've declared pronouns, I want to use those pronouns, so go for it. Yeah, fantasy character names are also kind of bad at that too, right? If you have a character whose name is Spline, well, is Spline male or female or other? Don't know. So we have that we have to pay attention to as well. And so far, I'm really interested in how that sort of breakdown is going down. It's great. I also have not had any complaints yet from people accusing somebody of playing something they're not and failing at it, which kind of shows that, you just have to try and things work out. So that helps. So the other thing is that auto-gendering, Ellie says, I've auto-gendered Gerald without asking. Auto-gendering, I don't think that's such a terrible thing. It's okay. If a name is a typically masculine or a typically feminine name, and you assign them the pronouns that you would assume, that's okay. I don't think that's a problem, because that person can correct you. And you don't have to make a huge deal out of it. You could have been like, oh, I thought you were a he. Turns out you're a they. Cool, we move on. Or he versus she. That's also fine. All of that is okay. Not a big deal. There is a Twitch plugin for pronouns. It's the plugin has 2 steps. You have to set your pronoun in a website, and then you also have to run the extension. It'll show up as you're looking at chat on Twitch. People who have set their pronouns, you'll be able to see them, which is handy. So yeah, auto-generating I don't think is a big deal. But I tend to ask for online nicks, because also if I see Ellie Spot, I might think Ellie. Ellie is a traditional female name, so I could use female pronouns, but it might be Eli. It could be Eli Spot. Eli is a typically masculine name, or depending on the time frame that you're putting it in. So I wouldn't necessarily know. Or maybe you're neither of those things. So all of these things are things that we just have to, we just got to be a little careful of as we move forward. But internet nicknames are definitely not necessarily easy to suss out right off the bat. The screen names that I've used in the past have been undecipherable when it comes to gender, so there you go. Sasha is one that really helped me remember it. Yep, Sasha. I went to school with a Sasha, and I went to a high school that was all male. I can't say that was my choice, but whatever. I just didn't encounter women named Sasha until after I graduated from high school. So there's that. Yeah, it's the diminutive of a man's name in Russian. Yeah. It depends on the language too. You're absolutely right. Yeah. So that's just things that we gotta keep in mind, and as we move forward, and especially in the role-playing space, because it is a big part of the role-playing space. I will take this opportunity to remind people that I am a cisgendered white male. I am by far not the expert on any of this. I have my own opinions, but my opinions are worth only what you decide they're worth. Go and ask somebody who actually lives this as an experience day to day, and you'll probably get a better answer than you will from me. So. Okay, that's just cool enough that I had to throw that up on screen. Ellie Spot is technically a biochemical essay I did and thought it was super cool as StarCraft 2 came out. Yeah, honestly, it's a great thing for a name anyway. All right. Do we have any questions before we go? I mean, we're counting down, moving into the last little bits of our time here. So if there's anything that people want to talk about, now's the time to bring it up. Gladly take any questions or comments that need to come through. While we're waiting for those, I'll just remind people that you have the opportunity to play in our Changeling the Dreaming 20th anniversary game. If you've never played Changeling before, it's a great way to learn. If you've played Changeling before, we'd love to have you just the same. And we've been having a lot of fun doing it so far. It's a relaxed atmosphere. It is low pressure gaming, but there's been some very good roleplay coming out recently, which kind of shows that people are getting more comfortable and moving into, playing through their characters and seeing that drama through. We have comprehensive safety tools that we're using on that server to keep everybody safe, but also able to play to the maximum of their ability. So very happy about that as well. So Zenrobo has asked, what do you do to rejuvenate when fatigue knocks at the door? Yes, Requiem, if you could repost it, that would be handy. Just because I have many windows open at the moment. What do I do to rejuvenate when fatigue knocks at the door? First, I identify the source of that fatigue and see what I can do about it. Second, I do not hesitate to ask for what I need. Sometimes that's time, but not always. It's not always about I have to take a break. Sometimes it's as simple as I need you to take this load off of me, or I want to do something different because this is getting boring, or I would really appreciate receiving some feedback from you because I'm getting the impression that things aren't going as well as you'd like. I advocate for myself because fatigue is also something that while I'm conscious of it for everybody at the table, if I'm feeling fatigue, that's the moment to not necessarily be selfish, but to really examine what do I need at this moment to do better, because I cannot assume that other people know. Requiem's question that he asked over in Discord, what are some differences or challenges between depicting an NPC in a mass game versus a tabletop game? There are a few. They're not as pronounced as you might think. The main major one that I would point out is I don't bring an NPC into a scene where there are a lot of players who are interacting well if I think that NPC will be too disrupting a force. I want to encourage players to find the fun amongst themselves. I cannot be on the server 24 hours a day. So one of the issues, for instance, is that we'll have a lot of characters be like, I want to talk to the freeholder. Problem is, if I bring the freeholder in, if two people are engaged in a scene and it's very intense and it's very real and they're having a lot of fun doing it, and I bring the freeholder in, I risk popping the bubble, because then both players might think this is my one chance that I get to talk to the freeholder today, because otherwise she's not going to be around. And so they immediately will start to break free from that role play, from that bubble that they've created, so that they can move forward and discuss with me. I don't want that. So oftentimes the difference or challenge is I don't play an NPC in a crowded room, or I don't play an NPC if I feel like I'm going to be too much of a disruptive force. Now, the counter to that is I also have to make sure that the NPC makes an appearance so that players can access the NPC, because otherwise you'll end up in a situation where you never want to play at all, because you know that if you walk in, you'll have 8 people immediately rush you and say, I need to have a very serious conversation with you, and you can't have 8 serious conversations at once. So it's mostly about timing. It's not about the portrayal of an NPC. It's about knowing when and where to use them, because we want to create a situation where if a storyteller isn't present, you can still have a great time. But if a storyteller is present, then we have the tools that we need to advance and move the game in the ways that we think will be interesting for the player base, without causing so much disruption that players end up losing out on the fun that they could have been having if we had just kept our mouths shut. Oh, that's dumb. Someone set the power settings to turn off after 15 minutes while plugged in? I wonder whether that was just that it was set to a different power profile. Blah, that was probably me, so I'm dumb. We're going to end on Ellie Spot saying, I've been very surprised about how emotionally intense some scenes have been. Very excited for future. So am I. And emotionally intense, again, because we have the safety tools, means that I don't feel badly about them being intense, because I also know that people are less likely to get hurt because we have those tools there. Tomorrow, there will not be a punchy stream, but that doesn't mean you're without streams. I believe that Zenrobo Kate is going to be streaming Slay the Spire on her channel tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Going to kill that Spire dead. So that's at 1800. On Saturday, Doomed is still a possibility, but I think that Drew Crew is out. But Sunday we will have ExalTwitch Academy Season 2, Episode 10, which will be very cool. What was that Twitch name again? The Twitch name is right there. It is Zen_Robo. I'm going to throw that up on the screen so that you can see it. You can go follow there now. But also, if you are on our Discord, you'll be able to see the announcement when she goes live. That's ZEN_R0B0. Or you could just click her name, and I think it'll take you to her profile, and then you can do that. I know that I'm going to watch because A, it's Slay the Spire, which is awesome, and B, it's Kate, who is also awesome. So hope that we can see some of you there. Hope we get a chance to play with you on Disconcordia, because that'd be sweet. But otherwise, and even if you don't, that doesn't mean you're a bad person or that you're out of community. Absolutely not. It's only for people who want to play. But otherwise, thanks for tuning in, and do not forget that while it might be difficult, and it may not be the possible even, oftentimes the easiest way to get what you want in a role-playing game is to use your word hole. I'll see you next time.